1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, infinity! Part 4. I recently took offense when a close friend shared words that I felt were both anti-equality and spiteful, and after pointedly but politely calling him out on the matter, I decided to incorporate the theme of advancing equality in a letter to my son and to tuck my thoughts on the matter in the birthday card I sent to him. What follows is part 4 of 7 segments of my birthday epistle to my elder of 2 children and the father of my grand one. All 4 of your grandparents were born in the 1920s, and all 4 were born in the USA, a rather sweeping change since every single one of your great-grandparents on your mother's side was born in Ireland and immigrated to the U.S. around the same time my grandpa Tony came here from Switzerland. As you know, the 1920s were a time of accelerated change in the Western world, a world made much smaller with the introduction of the Ford Model T and its inherent ushering in of travel made easy, at least in comparison to travel prior to 1908, and the breakdown of societal norms following the War to End All Wars, WW1. The industrial age brought sweeping change as more men left farms with their back-breaking, low-paying, sunrise to sunset work and flocked to cities with their 10 or 12-hour, mind-numbing, better-paying factory jobs. Though President Ulysses S. Grant had issued an 8-hour workday proclamation back on May 9, 1868, it was Henry Ford buckling to a labor union pressure in 1926 that ushered in the first real 8-hour workday, a year that found 2 of your grandparents already drawing the breath of life and 1 attending primary school. Beyond the ridiculous shortening of workdays from 12 hours to 8, unions also fought to establish child labor laws and to increase safety on the job in order to reduce death, dismemberment, and disability among rank-and-file workers. Fortunately, our most cunning industrialists have found workarounds for these profit-reducing governmental overreaches and have replaced appliances that had long lifespans and the availability of subparts with washers, dryers, furnaces, and the like with ones that have far shorter lifespans and extremely limited, if any, availability of replacement parts. Progress is not always pretty, but rest assured that anything that interferes with profit will be fought tooth and nail by those reaping the rewards of commerce. Industrialists warned of the terrible downfall to industry and society that would accompany pandering to godless socialists with their seductive labor unions. Unions that were and are tools of Satan, led by radicals who wish to seduce hard-working Americans into becoming slothful malingerers. Just as right-thinking preachers and politicians had warned of the immorality that swept the nation with women gadding about unchaperoned in motor cars, so too did they sound the alarm concerning the devil at our doorstep, disguised as a sheep with a shortened work week. Want to talk government overreach? In 1935, private enterprise was slapped in the face with the introduction of Social Security, and if that wasn't enough, come 1938, a federal minimum wage was established. All this while knowing that idle hands are the devil's workshop and women his great seducers. Women, according to orthodoxy, were, of course, the great seducers. Just as Eve had caused Adam's fall, and by concatenation the fall of all man, following World War I, women continued their damnable seductions as they began to demand basic human rights. Rights that would turn the world, or at least the Western world, upon its head, and all based on an absurd corollary that followed the granting of rights beyond the founder's stipulation of white property Christian males. Absurd because every right-thinking citizen knew that women were unneedful of rights, as their care was enshrined in their male protectors, said protection being first the responsibility of their fathers, and once they reached menarche and were expected to marry, their husbands. Blame WW1 for the turning of God's laws on its head. There was far more than a smattering of chattering concerning the overthrowing of so-called Holy Writ that accompanied the advancing of equal rights for women. The outrage of equality was contingent on the ability of women to sell themselves as victims and not as the devil's tool and the great seducers and reducers of man as had been proclaimed for millennia. Just as all good people recognized that Eve had caused the fall of Adam and all mankind, there was outright outrage that women had begun to demand basic human rights. Human rights! This was a direct affront to established Western dogma, a dogma that praised women while figuratively hog-tying them. Extending rights to women was an absurd corollary that came from extending the rights our founders had clearly stipulated were the sole property of WPCM to a seemingly ever-broadening group of people. Following the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918 and the conclusion of World War I, voting rights for men 21 and older became the law of the land in Great Britain, and suffragettes managed to likewise secure the vote in the UK for propertied women over the age of 30 at the same time. Sadly, the mental disease of disrupting God's order of patriarchy managed to cross the Atlantic, and in 1920, U.S. women became eligible to vote. This national franchise plague again recrossed the ocean in 1928. British women gained parity with British men in regards to restrictions, or perhaps I should say lack thereof with British men. Absurdity upon absurdity, as every right-thinking WPCM citizen knew that women were unneedful of rights, as their care was enshrined in their male protectors. Never mind that a man's home was his castle, that men could beat their wives, that should women try to deny sexual pleasure from their husbands, that the husbands could take their wives by force, as a husband had a right to sex from his wife, and therefore taking what was his right could not be viewed as rape. I mean, if my donkey escapes and runs away to a place where donkey ownership is not allowed, that does not reduce my right to my donkey. And so it was with wives and husbands. Right, Dred Scott? Without legal protection, without rights for women enshrined in law and constitution, the protection of women came down to the fox guarding the hen house. If protecting women was the responsibility of girls' fathers and women's husbands, then who was to protect said females from their self-same guardians? The passing of the United States 19th Amendment preceded the birth of my mother by less than 4 months, and thus all 4 of your grandparents came into the world after women were granted the basic human right of being able to cast votes and to join in the process of selecting representatives to stand for them in the halls of Congress and to vote for the presidential candidate of their choosing, proving that, despite millennia of the rights of the many being trampled by the powerful few, we do see a slow but steady advancement in realizing those shining words that stipulate that all are created equal and that we live in a land that promises liberty and justice for all. Amendment 19, passed by Congress June 4th, 1919, ratified August 18th, 1920.